So I'm Paweł Krupa. I'm a software engineer at Red Hat. Previously, I was working as a systems architect at Comarch. And I'm usually doing automation, monitoring, IoT, and some other stuff, and some Ansible, because I created the Ansible roles, Cloudalchemy Ansible roles for Prometheus and the like. So, what is actually SLA? And we should start from this and not from SLO, because everyone, well, maybe not everyone, but a lot of people confuse those two abbreviations. So SLA is a service level agreement, and what it means is that's actually a contract, sometimes a legal document, and if someone has like an internet from Deutsche Telekom, you should probably look at this, and there is a statement that your internet is between those two values. That's part of your SLA, but your whole document is actually your service level agreement. So you have an explicit contract between your provider, in this case Deutsche Telekom, and you. It can be tied to a business, to a product decision. So in this case, we have actually a business. We have Deutsche Telekom, which is providing us an internet connection, and they have like a service level agreement with us. And always, there is a statement, what happens when SLO in your SLA is not met. But what is actually an SLO? Because we are talking about SLA. So, the SLO is a service level objective. Service level objective, which means that something that kind of needs to be met. And this is the commitment that your provider wants to maintain, like he wants to maintain a particular state of service in a given period of time, usually. So, something that needs to be met, something measured with SLI. What is SLI? Later. And SLI, for example, a good example is, for example, your SLI less than some target values, or your SLI in a threshold, like between lower and upper bound. One of the examples, it can be uptime, like you have 99.9% uptime measured over a weekly period for all your services. This is one of the SLOs. So, what is the SLI? Because I mentioned it earlier, and the SLI is actually a service level indicator. So this is something that is quantitative, but it's actually measuring one of the aspects of your service. So it's basically a quality of service measurement. It can be like request latency, throughput, availability, whatever you want, whatever can be measured and is part of your service. So why do we define SLO? Why do we really want it? Why not like do it everywhere in SLA or somewhere? SLO, as I said, is part of an SLA and is only like a kind of part of a metric, part of a thing that you want to measure, and you want to be in between like two values of your SLO. And this part, if you say it to your user, this actually sets some expectations about your service. So if you communicate that, oh yeah, I will be in 99.9% availability, that means that some time may happen that my service won't be available, but it should be in that range. So if people know that your service can be not like 100% available, they will probably reduce number of complaints. They might say that, oh yeah, there's something happening, but it is normal. So we can do a perfect SLO because we somehow need to define it, but there are some tenets that you need to have like a perfect SLO. First of all is that SLO needs to be attainable. If you set an SLO for your latency that your service will be reachable in 50 milliseconds, but your service is in Australia and your client is in Berlin, you will never meet it. That's not attainable SLO. So that's the first step. Second one, it needs to be measurable. We are monitoring meetup, it's obvious. Next one, it needs to be understandable. Understandable. And it's not only understandable by the service provider, but also by the consumer. Which means that you cannot do an SLO and say that, oh yeah, my network administrator knows what is going on, but my user doesn't. That's not a great SLO. Next one is that it needs to be meaningful. You can set an SLO for your CPU consumption, but it doesn't mean anything for your user, then it doesn't mean anything as a SLO. It doesn't make sense. Next one is that it needs to be controllable. You need to have full control over your system to have an SLO for that system. If you depend on some other stuff, on like external database, and your service is asking that database for something, then you cannot have like full queries per second with that database in a loop. Next one is that SLO needs to be affordable. And one of the greatest examples is setting uptime for 100% and setting your service to be available for 100% of time. No one does it. It's not affordable. You even have like 99%, it's still okay. And even if you add one more 9 to it, it takes 10 times more money than previously. So you need to set your SLO with your budget in mind. And the last one is that it needs to be mutually acceptable. You as a service provider need to accept what you are setting, and your user needs to accept what you are providing also in that same SLO. If you meet those tenants, you kind of have a perfect SLO if this is an SLO. So how do you define it? First of all, start by thinking about what your users care about. Not what you are measuring, but what you need to provide to your users. Start from this point, because this is what you want to do. You are providing a service, then it's important about how user who's consuming that service feels about it. If you start from this and adopt those 7 tenants from a previous slide, you will be okay. And from Prometheus view, you can kind of say that alerts can represent your SLOs, kinda, because SLO can be a subset of your alerts. If you can define a metric, which is essentially an SLI for you, if you can define it, then if you can do an alert on it, then you have your SLO. And more on that in next talk. Thank you.